Hey Raider Nation, what's good? Jesse Merrick here. Welcome into another episode of the Silver and Black Sports Network podcast. Now, we have got a lot to talk about today. For starters, the Raiders are switching to a 3-4 defense, so we'll break down what that actually means for Rob Leonard and the defense as a whole and some of the pieces that they currently have on the roster right now. Klint Kubiak also had a lot to say about the offensive line. I'll dissect some of the things he said and give you my take on what it means going forward. And we're doing a deep dive on some players that you guys should be watching at the Combine this week. I tried to get to as many scheme fits and explanations as to why these guys are interesting for you, Raider Nation, so make sure you're listening. When we get to that, there's going to be a lot of names that I throw at you. This is a deep dive in every sense of the word. But before we get to all of that, let's hit our question of the day. I want to know who you guys are most excited to watch at the Combine this week. Hit me with a one name or even throw multiple names in the comments. I want to know who you guys have your eyes on the most this weekend at the Combine. And also, shout out to all of our new subscribers. There have been a lot of you lately. If you haven't already subscribed, get on board. Smash that subscribe button. And also check us out online at silverandblacksportsnetwork.com and subscribe to our free Raiders newsletter. It's chock full of all the latest Raiders news, analysis, and insights delivered straight to your inbox every Friday morning. You can't beat that price. Now, with all that out of the way, buckle up because today is going to be a fun one. All right, guys, first let's start with Klint Kubiak telling us all that the Raiders will now be running a 3-4 base defense. Before I riff on this, here's what he had to say about it and why it makes sense with Rob Leonard's background.
I do see us being a base 3-4 team. See us being able to play 4 down as well. I think Robbie can be very multiple with his fronts. You know, obviously coming from working with Mike, working in Miami with Flores, he's got a lot of really impressive influences. But he also has, he has his own identity as well. So, we're getting to work on that part of the puzzle right now. And talking personnel this time of year. But I'm really excited about it. Really more of the person more than anything. That just from his background in Baltimore, he's been in a lot of schemes, but he has a concise vision on who he wants to be. But as we get into free agency and the draft, and who our players are and what they do best, that's what we're going to eventually evolve to. But you got to have a starting point, and that starting point to me would be a base 3-4.
All right, so let's break it all down, okay? He mentioned Mike Macdonald. Well, look, Mike Macdonald in Seattle now runs out of a 4-3 base, kind of like a nickel 4-3 base. But when he was in Baltimore with Leonard, they ran that classic Ravens 3-4. That's what you can probably expect to see coming here to Vegas, or at least something that looks similar to that. Now, overall, we're going to see a lot more versatility and speed brought to the table in the front seven for the Raiders. Up front, by the 3 down guys, you really need some big, strong dudes there to control the line of scrimmage. Also of note, in a 3-4 defense, you can typically get a bit more creative and complex disguising coverages and blitzes, primarily because the offense doesn't always know where the 4th rusher is going to come from. So that's where your advantage lies in that. But keep in mind that the defenses and base defenses as a whole aren't used a ton around the league. They're only used about 30% of the time. And nickel is really the new base defense in the NFL, which would mean that we would see a lot of 3-3-5 type of looks. That's 3 defensive linemen, 3 linebackers, and 5 DBs, safeties, whatever. But that's going to be a mix of so many different personnel types. But that's basically what we'll probably see more of, is that 3-3-5 type of look from the Raiders on defense. And this is one of those things where, look, every coach says that they're going to be multiple, but I think in this case, they really are going to be multiple in every sense of the word, because Klint Kubiak did say that they also want to see some 4-down fronts as well, but that 3-4 would be their actual base. So there's a lot to break down in all of that, and we will get to that in the coming weeks as they make more signings and the draft and everything, because then you can really start to see where these pieces come to the fold. But looking at the roster right now, what they currently have, okay, Max Crosby, if he is still a Raider, which again, I've said multiple times, I think he is. Even Kubiak came out, when he spoke as well and said that he wants Max to be a Raider. John Spytek has shut that down many times as well, so wait and see what happens there. But in this scheme, Max would be an outside linebacker, like a stand-up rusher. Again, he'll be moved around a ton. He's not really going to be asked to be dropped back in coverage a lot. I understand these outside linebackers sometimes are asked to do that, and we saw Max do it a bit last season. I don't think in this scheme we would really see it all that often. Max is an edge rusher. They're going to have him rushing the quarterback big time in this one. This is a guy that would be able to do a lot of damage, I think, in a scheme like this. We even saw him in a bit of a Patrick Graham type of scheme where they were doing 3-4 when Graham first came along. So this isn't all that out of the ordinary for them. Tyree Wilson is another interesting one, though. He has shown clear versatility across the defensive line, but that's in a 4-3 base defense. Now, as they move to a 3-4, he's a guy that I think transitions more to being a 3-4 defensive end in this system. And I think he brings some interesting things to the table. This is a guy that, like, yes, has struggled with his get off and stuff like that, but his length, his size, his strength, if he can put it all together as a depth piece, again, I don't think he's going to be counted on for massive minutes or anything like that, but I think this is a guy that can be a rotational piece for the Raiders, I think he's going to be really interesting as a 3-4 defensive end in this scheme. Rob Leonard knows him. Maybe they can get more out of him again. This is kind of make or break season for him. I think this helps him the most in terms of switching to this 3-4 defense. They can likely get more out of him. I, again, like him as a defensive end in this style of system, scheme, in that 3-4 base. Adam Butler is another very interesting piece, okay? If you go back to 2019, he had a lot of success with the Patriots moving all across their 3-4 front, okay? I think he is suited better as a defensive end in a 3-4, but again, just another versatile piece for the Raiders in this scheme because he played some nose tackle for them as well, fared very well on that team. I think he was tied for the team lead in sacks, but again, when they moved him around and they had him at that, left or right defensive end spot, he played really well and he shined. So that's another guy I'm real excited to see in this scheme. I've thought for so many years, and Adam Butler has said he's tired of being the underrated guy, but I've thought that for so long that he's so underrated. I think this scheme with that 3-4 base, with, again, needing that versatility along the front and everything, and really at all levels, but especially on the front here, he's the guy they're going to move around and create some interesting opportunities for. Another name to keep an eye on, okay? Malcolm Kuntz. What the heck ends up happening with him, okay? Yes, he's a free agent. I think it's probably time to move on from him, but if they do re-sign him, he did come out of college as an outside linebacker, so he translates well into this 3-4 base as a stand-up outside linebacker, as a stand-up edge rusher. So again, just an interesting wrinkle to keep an eye on of how they could potentially use Kuntz if they bring him back. There are some pieces in that front for the Raiders that I just think are very intriguing in this, and I can get and see why they would move to that 3-4 front. Now, I also want to touch on what Klint had to say about the offensive line. First off, it's very clear that he likes Jackson Powers-Johnson. Check out what he had to say about him.
Yeah, well, I see a versatile guy, a guy that can play guard and center. Where he's going to be for us, that's to be seen. But the fact that he can do multiple spots is really exciting. I really like JPJ's play style. I like turning on that Chicago game and see him being physical and, playing through the echo of the whistle. That's the kind of mindset I want our guys to play with.
Well, that's a breath of fresh air, isn't it? I love hearing that for JPJ. Again, he noted Jackson has versatility, so we'll have to wait and see where he ultimately ends up at either center or guard. But overall, those are some pretty good signs that he loves the way that he plays. Obviously, Jackson plays, like his hair is on fire, super physical guy. We saw when he returned and started playing again, like that's when, the intensity got cranked up a ton. So I love that Klint loves him. Again, Jackson, a very athletic kid. I think he slots in very well into this scheme. I cannot wait to see where he ends up because, again, that will unlock and give us a lot more answers as to what everything else is going to look like. But again, we won't have those answers for quite some time till we see them out on the field, not till, May, I think it is. So yeah, it's going to be quite a long time before we see them in minicamp and stuff like that. But Klint didn't stop there. Earlier this week, you guys heard Vinny and I talking on the show about the offensive line, and Vinny did say that the Raiders do like some of the pieces they have there and may not, be doing this massive overhaul that everyone is expecting. And Klint Kubiak actually backed that up. Take a listen.
I've seen, obviously you had some stability at both tackle spots. You got some young picks and with JPJ, with Caleb. It's a work in progress. Still learning all the guys, but still kind of catching up on last season and what they've done. But what I do know is that, we're going to have, we have a clear teaching style. I've been around, whether it was New Orleans or Seattle or Minnesota. I've seen Rick Dennison get the best out of his guys, and the main thing is that we get them all playing together. And that comes with teaching our system. So the quicker we can get them up to date with the language, with the verbiage, with our play style, and the more they can get reps together and communicate together, then that's when they start improving. So I do like the guys that we got, and we're always looking to get better.
Now, the first thing that really stuck out to me there is he talked about stability at both tackle spots. Now, that would be both Colton Miller and DJ Glaze that he's talking about. I'm wondering now, did they run it back with DJ Glaze? I do think it's time for them to move on from him, but I will be honest, like he was trending up before last year, before he took that big step back when it was just a mess overall in that old offensive line room with the Carrolls and stuff like that. So maybe I'm overreacting, maybe a lot of us are, and maybe they bring him back. But either way, it's clear that Klint and the Raiders as a whole believe wholeheartedly in Rick Dennison and what he can do to maximize that group. He said it multiple times in that availability with the local media here from Vegas. So he's all in on Rick Dennison as the O-line coach and thinks he can maximize that group. Now, that doesn't mean that they won't invest in the O-line. Keep that in mind. They definitely will. But there's an evaluation that's going to be happening over the next handful of months here, and they're going to have to play free agency in the draft very strategically. How that works out is going to be fascinating. My guess is that both Jackson and Caleb are going to ultimately be guards. Now, does Caleb end up starting? I don't really know, but the center market out there is already kind of drying up, with Linderbaum likely going back to Baltimore and McGovern likely staying in Buffalo. So I bet they actually draft a center, then maybe sign a tackle. Because historically, look, I'll be honest, like you don't really want to sign those tackles. Historically, you draft the right tackles, that is. But we'll see how it plays out for them. Having said all of that, again, maybe they look at the center market and say, hey, look, we want Jackson to be our center, and we take advantage of some of the guys out there like an Isaac Seumalo or Zion Johnson or some of the names out there free agent-wise that are guards, because there are better options at guard there. Maybe they draft a guard, whatever it is. There's just so many options of what could actually end up happening for them, and it's going to be so fascinating to see it happen. And again, how they approach free agency and also the draft will tell us a lot about where these guys ultimately do slot in. So again, going to be fun to watch how all of that transpires. Now, you guys better buckle up because this is where the deep dive really starts, all right? Let's talk Combine and talk about some of the players that you guys, Raider Nation, should be watching this week. I am going to be throwing a ton of names at you guys and throwing out a bunch of different second and third round grades. So keep in mind that when I throw out all these second and third round grades, I know the Raiders can't get all of these guys in the second and third round. They only have a handful of picks, right? These are just some potential options, and we're kind of taking a broad stroke, a broad look at some real key positions for the Raiders overall. And we're going to start on offense. We don't have to worry about quarterback. We know that's going to be Fernando Mendoza. Obviously, Klint Kubiak did say he wants a fullback, and he also wants another running back for Ashton Jeanty. I'm not going to dive too deep into those. The Raiders are set, at least in terms of their starting running back in Ashton Jeanty. We'll see where they go in terms of running back. We'll be doing a deeper dive or looking more at that maybe next week after the Combine is done and stuff like that. But right now, where I want to start as a former wide receiver, we got to start with the receivers, and particularly with some big-bodied, quote-unquote, ball winners who could be like the true X-type of receivers, okay? Think like your Mike Evans type of players. These are potential targets for the Raiders, maybe in the third round and possibly later. First off, Baylor's Joshua Cameron, okay? But then the next one that's really interesting is Georgia State's Ted Hurst. He had 27 catches on targets of 20-plus yards over the past 2 years. That's the most in the FBS over that span. He is an interesting sleeper candidate to keep an eye on for the Raiders. Then there's obviously Indiana's Elijah Surratt. He's a guy who knows where he actually ends up. Second, third round, fourth round, whatever it is. But the back shoulder ball between the two of them, between Mendoza and Surratt, off the charts. I really like Surratt. He's another guy that you would have to believe is in play. We've seen teams do that, draft, the quarterback's receiver from college and stuff and pair them together. I, again, could see that kind of coming to fruition, okay? Texas Tech's Reggie Visual, another guy to keep an eye on as well within that grouping. And then here's an interesting one, okay? Not a big-bodied dude, but he could be a familiar game changer for their new quarterback in Fernando Mendoza, and that's Omar Cooper Jr. Now, look, I know it's an easy one to say, bring his receiver and everything like that. But this kid looks like he could be a game changer. I've seen comps of Chris Godwin, Julian Edelman, and even Deebo Samuel as well. It's all over the place with him, but the kid is a player. He's going to likely go in the second round, so my big question is there, do they want to invest in a receiver that high in the draft with all their other needs? Probably not very likely, but again, he's a game changer. Like I said, I don't think receiver is going to be a primary concern for them at the top of the draft in the first 2 days, but those are some guys to keep an eye on. This is where things get interesting, and again, we start really diving into the weeds on some of the players here, and it starts with some fits at center for the Raiders. Obviously, like I said, the center market drying up. Now let's dive into some of those guys, okay? At the center spot, Logan Jones from Iowa, okay? Iowa ran a lot of zone The tie-in there is also to their new running back coach as well for the Raiders. He spent a season there. They averaged like 4.6 yards a carry, rushed for over 2,300 yards, okay? But the cool thing about him is he showed major improvement over his career. In his first 2 seasons out on the field with Iowa, he gave up 42 pressures, but then he cut that number down to just 8 pressures allowed in his final 2 seasons with the Hawkeyes. Talk about improvement. I mean, that's huge. If he's on the upwards trajectory, think about what an NFL offensive line coach can do with a kid like that. That's massive. Parker Brailsford, that's another guy from Alabama. Keep an eye on him. Pat Guggen from Indiana. Obviously, there's familiarity with Mendoza, and he didn't give up any sacks or quarterback hits this season. Obviously, that is very interesting. But these next couple of guys are the ones that I kind of circle where I'm like, ooh, those could be really shrewd moves for the Raiders. And first off is going to be Sam Hecht, the Kansas State center. Okay, this kid is not going to wow anybody with his measurables or anything like that. That's not going to stand out. But his technique is on point, and he's a real athletic guy at the center spot as well. He could be a sneaky good option for the Raiders. I've seen a 3rd-round grade on him. Maybe that's where he ends up, but that is one kid really to keep an eye on. And the next couple of these guys, honestly, are a lot of very interesting and athletic players with some traits that are just unique that they bring to the table. Connell Liu, the kid is a center from Auburn. Okay, he is another bit of an undersized guy. He could be an option later on day 3. But then Jake Slaughter from Florida is another kid that could be a fit. Okay, he moves really well, and he also only gave up 4 pressures in 2025. Not too bad. Now let's keep the trend going here with the offensive line, with some other O-linemen to watch at some other key spots. As we said, we got to wait and see how things transpire for the Raiders in terms of where other guys slot in. But some other dudes that are very interesting names would be Oregon interior offensive lineman Emmanuel Pregnon. He's got a 3rd-round grade mostly. He could go much higher than that, could go in the 2nd round. But this kid hasn't allowed a sack since 2022. How insane is that? And he allowed just 1 sack and 37 pressures over the last 3 seasons. Sorry, 2022 is wrong. I forget the exact year on that. But he hasn't allowed a sack in a long time, but he's only allowed just 1 sack and 37 pressures over the last 3 seasons. He also boasts 50 games played in college, so durability is not a concern with this kid heading into the next level in the NFL. And speaking of kids that have played a ton of games, Blake Miller. This is the one where, like I said, I think you more than likely want to draft your right tackle. You don't necessarily want to sign those guys. The dude from the Colts, Braden Smith, I think I'm blanking on his last name, but he could be an option there. But you want to go younger, and if you get your right tackle figured out, then you're set with your 2 bookends. Again, we'll see how they feel about DJ Glaze, but Blake Miller, the right tackle from Clemson, okay? Folks are saying that he's a 3rd-round guy. This kid is another Iron Man. He had 54 career starts at right tackle in college. This isn't a Trent Brown type of guy out there. He's going to show up game in and game out, and he's going to be playing. And Lance Zierlein says that he has got unusual lateral quickness and fluidity in space. He could be a great fit for the Raiders in this scheme. Again, though, sounds like Klint does like DJ Glaze, like I noted up there. But as I said, I like drafting a tackle, particularly at right tackle there. I'd love to see this kid end up in silver and black. I think he would be a very interesting fit for them. And again, just that tenacity and the Iron Man, ability that he brings to the table, where he is just going to be in there day in and day out. They always say the best ability is availability. That kid has been available in every which way possible. Now, here's some other names to keep an eye on, just in terms of at tackle or guard as well. Another kid from Iowa, that would be Jennings Dunker. The flow is off the charts. That kid's hair, he's got the mullet / whatever on the sides there. But he was a tackle. He's likely going to move back into guard because of limited athleticism. And I understand what you're saying. Well, look, the Raiders need, athletic offensive linemen. Yeah, I get it, but he played well there at Iowa in, again, another program that runs a lot of those zone schemes. So again, the fit is there. How likely? I don't know. We'll see. Maybe, later on in the draft. Another kid who could be a possible sleeper is Arizona State's Max Ironanker. I probably butchered his name. That's a tough one to say. But then there's also Northwestern's Caleb Tiernan as well. And now, as we move to the defensive side of the ball, here's where much more of the interesting names get brought up. I like the guys on offense there. Don't get me wrong. But, you can only get so much into the weeds on some of the offensive linemen and things like that. You can really get some interesting traits and some things like that from the defenders, and that's where this gets really fun, okay? Let's look across the D-line in general. We're not talking just D tackles or ends or anything like that. I'm just lumping the entire D-line as a whole in here and kind of bouncing around from different guys. Gabe Jacas, the D lineman out of Illinois. He's 6'3", 260, okay? He's likely going to the second round, but we'll see how it goes. But he probably translates more for the Raiders and this new 3-4 defense as a stand-up edge rusher and would be a great option opposite of Max Crosby, okay? And this kid, my God, he plays strong as hell. And his draft profile says that his game is more steak than sizzle, which I absolutely love. The scout terms this time of year are awesome. I miss Mike Mayock when he would always bust those out. But overall, this kid is just stout, and he's going to play really strong at the point of contact. And one NFC scouting director that has actually said that he's smart, he's a great teammate, and he's really, really strong. Play through your face type of guy. That, to me, sounds just like the type of guy that the Raiders are looking to add in this new Spytek and Kubiak era, doesn't it? They always talk about wanting the guys like the character guys and things like that love football, all those different things. He fits into the mold very well. Again, keep an eye on him in the second round there. Then there's Lee Hunter, the massive body out of Texas Tech University. You guys have seen him. If I remember right, I think he wore number 5 in college. He's one of the big bodies that wears the single-digit numbers. I always loved seeing that. But this guy is a two-gapping nose tackle. The dude is just an absolute monster. He's 6'4", 330 pounds. Now, he's going to not run well, obviously, at that size, but he is a guy to watch maybe at the top of the second round if he falls that far. Switching to that 3-4, the Raiders have to find a nose tackle, and that's obviously going to be huge for them to kind of unlock this defense as a whole to like set things up in the center of your defense. Now, they could draft him and slide Adam Butler over. Like I said, Adam Butler has played nose tackle in a 3-4 scheme up there in New England, but I do think he translates better as a regular, as a defensive end in this scheme. So bringing a guy like Lee Hunter in to lock down that nose tackle spot, that would be very interesting. Again, I wouldn't be surprised to see the Raiders invest in the defensive line early on in this draft because they're going to get the quarterback. Again, they're going to invest in the offensive line in some way, shape, and form, but then really probably hit home with that defensive front. Even though they switched to the 3-4, look what they did up there in Seattle. They invested in that defensive line. That 4-down front changed things for them in a very big way. You better believe that Klint Kubiak wants to see them build up that front and also make Max Crosby happy, too, to take some things off of him, too. So, again, maybe they draft Hunter and slide Adam Butler over. Who knows? We'll see what happens there. Another kid who's a bit of a freak, Kristen Miller from Georgia. He's 6'4", 310 pounds. He, again, likely goes in the second, but he lined up all over Georgia's defensive front. Again, brings that positional versatility, the thing that teams really love. Miller has a quick first step and recorded the 10th best run defense grade by Pro Football Focus among all defensive linemen this past season. Again, the key is stopping the run without having to bring, more than 4 guys and things like that. Even in this 3-4 front where you can mix up where that 4th guy is coming from, he's a guy where I just think you look at him and fits the profile of what the Raiders could be looking for along the defensive front. You got to find guys that can stop the run. He's one that can definitely do it. Another name here is Caden McDonald from Ohio State. I've seen folks saying that he could go in the first round through the third. The grades are all over the place. So let's wait and see where he goes and how his testing goes this week. Now, his technique is still a bit iffy, but he's a dominant run stuffer. He posted an FBS leading 13.6% run stop rate, that is, among interior defenders, and plays real strong and is clearly athletic as all get out. Should be interesting to see how he tests and where he ultimately ends up this weekend, in terms of what he does combine-wise, but maybe he's a guy that ends up drawing some more attention to him. Now to the next position that just got a whole lot more interesting after the Raiders switched to that 3-4 base defense, because, man, you need more linebackers, okay? That's where things get fun. Cincinnati's Jake Golday, he's a guy to keep an eye on. He's a day 2 pick, okay? He would be more of an inside backer in that 3-4 scheme for the Raiders. Then there's Alabama's Dante Lawson. He's super athletic at the linebacker spot. Again, likely going to test really well this weekend. He could be a guy that a lot of people are talking about. Again, that's Alabama's Dante Lawson. I'm blanking on the kid's name, but there was a guy a handful of years ago wore number 0 coming out of Bama. I think he just kind of reminds me of him. I used to work in Alabama and I covered them. And he was a kid they drafted from, or they recruited from Louisiana, and LSU thought they had him. I just can't remember the kid's name. But again, he's a guy to keep an eye on right there. He will probably be somebody that people are really talking about after this week. Then here's a name that will probably sound familiar. Missouri's Josiah Trotter. Yes, it's that Trotter. His dad is Jeremiah Trotter, so obviously he's got the NFL bloodline. He's one of those see-ball, hit-ball type of guys, one hell of a run defender. Again, there's a theme here, but he's a liability in coverage. That could also be an issue and could spell a bit of a disaster for him, okay? But he should be another guy who runs pretty well at the combine. He's an athletic guy. And he could be for an option for the Raiders, possibly in the third round of the draft or something like that. And then the name that everybody's been waiting for. Some of you guys probably sitting there saying, well, wait, you haven't brought up Jacob Rodriguez yet. Yes, we all know him. He was the best linebacker in college football last year. His name, was in the headlines nonstop. He's probably not going to go as high as many people expect, okay? But he's an inside backer, could be for the Raiders, all right? And I think he could be available in the fourth round. I know that's pretty late. A lot of people thinking, like, there's no way he lasts that long. But those are some of the grades I'm seeing out there from some people, okay? And this is a big weekend for him because he's an undersized guy, so he does need to test very well. And there's a couple guys on this list who are undersized guys that have to test well for some teams. But again, that can also help them go under the radar and help the Raiders' case maybe as well if they seem to zero in on them. But this guy's ball production in college speaks for itself. He was a turnover machine in every sense of the word. He managed 6 pass breakups, 5 interceptions, and only 3 touchdowns allowed across more than 800 career coverage snaps. Okay, I know you guys have been screaming from the mountaintops about a linebacker that could cover for so long. Seems like a kid that could do that. Rodriguez is a guy, again, that I know a lot of you guys like. I've seen you guys in the comments talking about Rodriguez since the season ended, and obviously the Raiders need to replace their whole starting linebacking core. I mean, again, they switched to a 3-4, so now it adds even more into the mix there, but I think the Raiders will end up having options and answers at outside linebacker. The big question, again, going to be at inside linebacker for them. Then, as we keep this one moving, let's talk about Landon Barton. We're not going to dive too deep on him, but he could be a day 3 option for the Raiders, going forward as well. A kid that's also got bloodlines of a lot of people from Utah and his family that have been highly successful athletes. So again, athlete in his blood for sure. And then there's Pitt's Kyle Lewis. He's an undersized guy. So he does need to run very well. Like I've said, that's going to be a bit of a trend here. But in sub packages, the Raiders could have some fun with him, possibly even as a nickel defender. Again, that's so in vogue in the NFL. I've seen him with some third-round grades. But this kid, if he runs well, is going to draw a lot of attention. A lot of people probably going to be talking about him. Again, another guy who just, like the Raiders' big thing that they're going to need is a lot of versatile pieces, especially not only in today's NFL, but with moving to this 3-4 defense. So again, that's a kid I think you should keep an eye on. And overall, look, corner is a very valuable position, but I'm not really going to hit on corner in this breakdown here. We'll see what transpires over the weekend when those guys do their thing, but because it does sound like the Raiders want to bring Stokes back, and I do like what Darian Porter brought to the table as well. We heard Spytech talk about them wanting to bring Stokes back. Sounds like Stokes wants to come back too. He stayed healthy. They got more out of him. Rob Leonard has familiarity with him, even though he was the D-line coach. He knows him, and it sounds like Stokes would want to come back. So, I'm curious to see what happens there in that front. And like I said, I like Stokes and Darian Porter as a combo if they can develop them and build around them, and that's the key. But overall, in some way, shape, or form, they're going to add somebody. Obviously, Cody Alexander said, hey, throw a bag at Reek Woolen. Just don't have him tackle. That's the big thing. But he's a freak athlete. He's an alien. So we'll see what happens in terms of free agency, the draft, all that stuff. But I'd imagine they're probably going to concentrate more on the back end in the draft, or possibly even free agency too, but at safety. Because safety is so important in the NFL now. And Polamalu, honestly, just didn't play consistently good enough, even though I thought he had a really good opportunity to do that. And I know better coaching could improve things for a lot of people involved there, but he was a guy that I think was a bit of a letdown, and you want to see more consistency from him. So we'll see what happens, back there on the back end at safety, how they evaluate those guys. And also Chin is another one, that's kind of a wild card too. Like, how do they value him? He's got another year on his contract. He played some of those big nickel roles as well. But again, just another versatile piece that they could, move around all over the place. Like, that's going to be the key for the Raiders, just finding a lot of pieces like that. But as we keep it rolling, let's dive into some of the safety names. The first big one, you've heard us talk about it here on the podcast, Emmanuel McNeil-Warren out of Toledo. I'm sure a lot of you guys are familiar with him. Cody Alexander identified him as a guy to keep an eye on if he slips out of the first round. Yeah, it may not happen, but you guys can hope. This would be a guy that could fill that kind of Kyle Hamilton, Nick Minwari role for the Raiders. And get this. This is a crazy stat. He enters the 2026 NFL Draft with the 99th percentile PFF run defense and coverage grades over the past 3 seasons. That's insane. 99th percentile over the past 3 seasons. Just wild. Again, another one of those kids that can just totally unlock an entire defense and change what you can do with so many other pieces around there. I am so fascinated to see where this kid ends up, what the testing looks like this weekend, what the talk is like him surrounding the draft. I've heard some people saying keep an eye on him at 17. I think that's where the Lions are because they're going to be without Brian Branch probably. So like, I just cannot wait to see where this kid slots up and what a guy like Daniel Jeremiah, one of those folks, starts saying about him as we get closer to the draft. But here are some of the other ones that like the Raiders probably have a better possibility of landing and are diving a little bit deeper into the weeds here. Bud Clark from TCU is a guy to keep an eye on. Obviously, the Raiders have some experience, with kids from TCU. I've seen him tagged with a 3rd-round grade. That is Bud Clark. Okay, Lance Zierlein calls him a coverage versatile safety in a corner's body. Basically, you can put him over the top or move him to the slot to cover at corner as well, or cover into that nickel type of role there. That kind of versatility is so coveted around the league, and the Raiders obviously need a playmaker at safety. They need a true nickel. They haven't had somebody like that, since Nate Hobbs left in free agency either, which I know was only a year, but they need a real nickel that they can count on. This kid seems like he could be that kind of guy, and the ball production is off the charts. All right, we all know how much the Raiders have struggled to create turnovers, and like Merrick did when he was back there at TCU, when he was coming out of TCU, he created a ton of turnovers. Clark did the same thing. He created a ton of them. So again, go back and watch some Bud Clark. Keep an eye on him this weekend. He's a guy that could be in the mix for the Raiders, and again, just another versatile piece. Yes, he's undersized, but he's got great coverage skills as a safety that you can also move down into the slot. And I think you really need that with the way offenses are going, especially now as we see what's going to happen with, LA and Mike McDaniel stepping into the fold there as well. Here's another sleeper pick for you at the safety spot. Michael Taffy, all right, this kid from Texas. He'll be a day 3 pick, so we'll have to wait a while till we really get a chance to see about him. He's going to need to test very well this week to improve his stock, so keep an eye on him there. But his tape is great. He's an undersized kid at 5'11" and under 200 pounds, so speed is something that people flag with him. But man, he's a savvy kid who communicates really well and gets his teammates in position consistently, okay? He was, one of those college football players that has just graded so well by PFF standards here, okay? Amongst college football's highest graded safeties in both 2024 and 2025, according to PFF. You have to love the sound of that. And even though he's more of that coverage type of guy, he fared pretty well against the run too. He recorded a 3.1% run stop rate over the past 4 years, which is in the 83rd percentile among safeties graded by PFF. So again, another interesting piece to come away with. Overall, I think specifically with the defensive side of things, we hit on a lot of very versatile pieces. And again, that's the key for the Raiders defensively, is find those versatile pieces to just throw a lot at opposing offenses and let Rob Leonard cook back there. So like I said, guys, that was a beast of names that I threw a million of them at you. Some of them we did a deep dive. Some of them I just throw the name out there and move on to the next one. So I hope that wasn't too much for you guys. And I hope you enjoyed it. I did put a lot of work into doing the research on all those guys and trying to put together a list of guys who actually make sense for the Raiders. But for now, after all of that talking, I got to shut up because that was just a lot. So have a good one, and we will catch you guys again on Tuesday. Take it easy.